Okay, let's go to John chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. I love this starting in the book of John because its focus is entirely on God Himself and His Word, which is one and the same. Verse 4, in Him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. The same came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all men through him might believe. So, of course, he's talking about John the Baptist there, who was going to tell us about the Messiah that was coming, or introduce him. He, being John, was not the light, not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. Talking about Jesus. He came into his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of the will of God. Doesn't say that, but that's what it means. It says, but of God. And the last verse I want to get here, and the Word was made flesh. The Word was made flesh. God was made flesh. Jesus Christ was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Such a beautiful picture of Jesus and his Word. God Almighty. And if we go over to get a couple of scriptures in chapter 6 of John, verse 35, and Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. Jesus is the Word. He's the bread of life. The bread is the Word. Verse 36, but I said unto you that ye also have seen me, and believe not. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. For I came down from heaven not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. And that is the Father's will which hath sent me, that of all which he hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day. And this is the will of him that sent me, that every one which seeth the Son and believeth on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up on the last day. Beautiful picture of Jesus Christ and what he's done for us by his coming is all summarized in those short scriptures. But the thing that I want to emphasize is the Word and the bread of life. And if you'll just keep that in mind as we continue with the service. I would like to see if there's any announcements that we need to make before we go to the Lord in prayer this morning. Anyone we should, yes?
Just as always, the kids and everything, and then we found out that the middle daughter, Cammie, the girl's mom, she'll be expecting a boy, we found out, so that'll be December, I believe, so.
Okay.
We'll have another grandson in the family, so.
Yeah, the bench is going to get fuller and fuller, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll have to name our own bench in here before too long.
Anyone else that we should remember?
As far as I'm concerned, my mom and just, the family down there, so apparently they're doing all good, so.
I will mention my father. He called me a couple of different times this week, and we had, the typical conversation. But he did ask me to be sure and say hi to everyone at the Oxford Church, and he expressed how much he enjoyed coming here and how much he misses it. And I miss having him here as well. Of course, he's in the Grace Primitive Baptist Church this morning, but we miss him here. So.
Got a couple of things. One, my brother, both my brothers, I just have prayed for them. And then Joshua got his results back, and all his moles were benign. So good news there.
God's hand and everything. So.
Yeah.
Very good. What a blessing.
Good news there. And sister-in-law's doing well. You went to the doctor with her, so you have the update on her.
She's doing good. She'll, not this Monday, but the next Monday, she'll see the doctor, and they'll start her, she's doing infusions every 2 weeks. But they'll start her on the pills that you take.
This
every
is
day.
Sister Sandy, right? Yeah.
And it's, there's a lot of side effects, not like chemo, so, she's pretty scared, pretty upset about taking it naturally,
Yes.
so.
But thankful at the same time, I'm sure.
I know, but my other ex-daughter-in-law, her son just lost his dad to COVID, and I'd like to remember Stephen. He means our prayers, and my
Okay.
brother's daughter has still got COVID that's real bad. She's had 3 kidney transplants, so she's not very good.
Oh, goodness. So we should remember all of them. I should mention Brother Keith texted me this morning, said he didn't feel like he could get out and drive this morning. And so we miss him. And Brother Jackson is still down with his sore hip, although he has been talking about trying to come back. So did we get the MRI on Thursday, or it's this coming Thursday? We get an MRI this coming Thursday. So we've got a few more days before we get that done, and then it'll be the following week, I'm sure, before we get any real information about what next steps we need to go to. Any others we should mention? Okay, if that be all, Brother Josh, could I ask you to word our prayer?
Dear Lord, we pray that you'll be with the ones that we have mentioned in this time. And we pray that you give them the strength and the healing that they need, and let the doctors know what they need to figure out, and keep them safe, and be with all of us in this time. Give us our strength to get through all this, and just let us be with us while we hear your word, and also just be with everyone around the world with all the struggles and everything, and give us all strength. We need it right now. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Josh. I appreciate that prayer. So if I have a text for today's talk, it's going to be in the 4th chapter of Matthew. So, 4th chapter of Matthew, verse 4. Now this is when Jesus after Jesus had been baptized by John the Baptist and had gone into the wilderness for 40 days, at which time he was tempted by Satan. And verse 4, but he answered and said, he was talking to Satan, let me go ahead and read the first 4 verses. So then was Jesus led up in the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights as he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Bread and the Word, bread and the Word. And of course he's referring to natural bread versus the Word of God, and that is so important for all of us from a spiritual standpoint. So my topic for today, if I were to give it a name, is Loaves and Fishes times 2. And I know everyone here has heard the loaves and fishes talked about and preached in the past. It's very popular amongst all the different denominations, Christian denominations out there. I've spent some time around Catholics, and Catholics actually have an organization called Loaves and Fishes, which is about helping other people. So it's a tremendous miracle, and I will tell you, it's in all 4 of the Gospels. But there's a second version of Loaves and Fishes, which is hardly ever referred to, and there's a great lesson that comes from both of those. So in the book of Matthew and Mark, there are 2 loaves and fishes accounts or miracles that take place. The book of Luke and John only talks about the first one, the one that is most well known. So that's what I mean about loaves and fishes times 2. So we're going to go to Mark chapter 6, where we were a minute ago, but a little bit earlier in the chapter. And we're going to talk about the first miracle of the loaves and fishes. And we're going to go chapter 6, verse 28. And it says, And brought his head in a charger and gave it to the damsel, and the damsel gave it to her mother. Now this is John the Baptist's head. He had just been beheaded by Herod and given the head to the damsel who had danced for him and had fulfilled his commitment to her. But that's not the point here. I wanted to give you the context that John the Baptist had just been beheaded. In verse 29, And when his disciples heard of it, they came and took up his corpse and laid it in a tomb. So the disciples, Jesus' disciples, buried him. And the apostles gathered themselves together unto Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said unto them, Come ye yourselves apart into the desert place and rest a while. So often when something like this would occur, Jesus would go into the wilderness, into the desert place or whatever, and it says, and rest a while. For there were many comings and goings, and they had no leisure so much as to eat. They were so busy they didn't even have time to eat. So he said, we need to go rest. We've just received this news of John the Baptist. And they departed into a desert, this is verse 32, in a desert place by ship privately. So they took a ship to the desert place, and the people saw them departing, and many knew him, and ran afoot thither out of all cities, and outwent them, and came together unto him. So people knew that he had left, but they determined where he was going and started to come to him. Because Jesus had been doing so many miracles and so many and spoken so many wonderful things that he was gathering large crowds of people. Verse 34, And Jesus, when he came out, saw much people, and was moved with compassion toward them, because they were as sheep, not having a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. So they were just milling around everywhere, and so he brought them together and he started to teach. And when the day was now far spent, his disciples came unto him and said, This is the desert place, and now the time is far past. It means it's getting late. It's getting late in the day. And we have this mass of people out in the desert, out in the wilderness. Verse 36, these are the disciples. Send them away that they may go into the country round about and into the villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. So everybody's hungry. They've been there all day, and there's villages scattered around, but it's in some cases far away. He answered, Jesus, and said unto them, Give ye them to eat. And they say unto him, Shall we go and buy 200 penny worth of bread and give them to eat? He saith unto them, How many loaves have ye? Go and see. And when they knew, they say 5 and 2 fishes. So 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And he commanded them to make all sit down by companies upon the green grass. And they sat down in ranks by hundreds and by 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, he looked up to heaven and blessed and brake the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before them, and the 2 fishes divided he among them all. And they did all eat and were filled. And they took up 12 basketfuls of the fragments and of the fishes. And they that did eat of the loaves were about 5,000 men. So that's a pretty big crowd, 5,000. And they're milling around, and Jesus teaches them, and then they get hungry, and they're out in the wilderness, and they have no food except these 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. And there's several lessons that come out of this right in this short set of passages. You notice that God, Jesus, when he often will ask people to take an action that they can do so that he can do a miracle. So he asks us to do what we can do, and then he does the rest. And what did he ask them to do? Go see how much food you have? First of all he said was, Give ye them to eat. And then he said, Go find out how much you have. And then he said, and he commanded them to make all sit down in companies. So God commanded them to do what they could do, what they were capable of doing, not what God is capable of doing. So you do this, and God took care of the rest. That's a very important message, and that same principle applies to us in our daily lives. We should always do what we can do, and we should always let God do the rest. And clearly, this was a great miracle that he was able to feed all these people. They started with 5 loaves. They ended up with 12 baskets. They had more at the end than what they started with. And isn't that what you get when the good Lord sends his blessings? You end up with more than you started with, in whatever form, spiritually or sometimes in the physical as well. And you notice that he also, before he distributed it, he looked up to heaven and he blessed it. What, in essence, he's praying. It's a prayer that God be with us during this time. He always asks us to do something. So we know that the Bible tells us in James that faith without works is dead. So if you look at the examples, God gives us the faith that we have. It comes from him. But it's our works that demonstrate that faith. So faith without works is dead. And James has at the very end of chapter 2 really walks through this very clearly, that faith is manifested by the works that we do. So if you look back in the book of Exodus, when Moses is standing at the Red Sea, and it's Exodus 14:16, God tells him to lift up his rod and outreach his hand. He told Moses to do what Moses could do, and Moses had faith and did what he was told to do. If he didn't have faith, he wouldn't have done what he was told to do. And God did the rest. He parted the Red Sea. It's another example. You can see the same thing in the book of Joshua when the children of Israel were going to go across the Jordan River. And in chapter 3, he says, when the soles of the priest's feet that are carrying the ark touched the water, God did the rest. So God instructed us to do that which we could do, and he would do the rest. And this applies to our life every single day, every single moment. So I want to read on now. Verse 44, and they did eat the loaves and were about 5,000 men. And straightway he constrained his disciples to get in the ship and to go to the other side before unto Bethesda, while he sent away the people. So Jesus sent the people away, and he told his disciples to go get in the boat and go to Bethesda. Now Bethesda is on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. All right, it's kind of in the northeastern part. Okay, and they were on the kind of the northwestern part. Now the Sea of Galilee is about 7 miles wide and 13 miles long. It's not a perfect rectangle, but it's a big body of water, a lot bigger than the lakes that we generally see around. So he told them to get on the ship and go over to Bethesda. And when he had sent them away, the people, he departed into a mountain to pray. So Jesus went up into the mountain to pray privately. And and I want you to think about that. Jesus is going to pray to his Father, God Almighty. And he goes up into the mountain to do this privately. Wouldn't you like to have been able to hear that prayer? That he's talking to his Father. I know when I talk to my Father, it's not nearly as interesting as this must have been. He's always communing with his Father. They're as one. It's a beautiful scene. Verse 47, and when even was come, that means evening, was come, the ship was in the midst of the sea, and he alone on the land. So Jesus was on the land. The ship with the disciples was out in the sea. And he saw them toiling in rowing, for the wind was contrary unto them. And about the 4th watch of the night, he cometh unto them, walking upon the sea, and would have passed by them. Now I want you to pay attention very closely. Verse 47 says the ship was in the midst of the sea. In the midst, in the middle, way out. Jesus is on the land. It's nighttime. There's a storm that's blowing, lots of waves, the wind. And what does it say? And he saw them toiling. It's not physically possible for us to see a ship 3.5 miles away on the water at night in a storm. But Jesus did. Does that not tell us that he always sees us? He's always there. He knows what's happening. It's an amazing story. But when they saw him walking upon the sea, they supposed it had been a spirit and cried out. For they all saw him and were troubled, and immediately he talked with them and saith unto them, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. Now, I want to jump over to Matthew, because in Matthew we hear the story about Peter walking on the water. And I want to, it's in Matthew chapter 14. And we'll start, in chapter 14, we'll start in about verse 24. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. As we just read, that's when Jesus saw that they were struggling in the midst of this sea. And in the fourth watch of the night. Now, the fourth watch of the night is about 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's pitch black dark at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's a great storm. And on the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, just like we read in Mark, saying, It is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. Now, keep in perspective, they just watched Jesus earlier that day feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Were they so caught up, so used to seeing miracles, that they didn't think that God was going to be watching over them and taking care of them? I don't know. But then they see him out there and they think they don't even know that it's him. They cried out for fear. Verse 27, But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. I'm here, and I want to take care of you. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And what did Jesus do? Jesus said, Come. That's all he said. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. Now, I know you've heard this story many times, and I'm sure, and it is true, when Peter took his eyes off Jesus, that's when he started sinking. So it's keeping your eyes on Jesus. But I want to suggest something else. Why would an apostle be in a ship during a storm and say, Jesus, can I come out on the water where you are? Why would he do that? Now, it doesn't tell us, and I can't answer that question, but what I can say is that Jesus said, Come, and then when he started to sink, immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Why did you doubt? First of all, are you tempting the Lord God by saying, I want to come out to where you are? I don't know that that's what this is saying, but it doesn't make, it doesn't seem very logical that Peter would want to go out there. This is the only one of the Gospels that talks about this particular event. What is the message? Maybe be careful what you ask for. Be careful what you ask for. When you ask God for something, make sure you're asking for the right things. Okay? I suggest that praying to win the lottery is not the right thing. Okay? Or praying for a new car is not the right thing. Jesus rebuked him as a result of this when he said, O thou of little faith. So let's go back to Mark, and we'll go to chapter 6 and pick up where we left off. Be of good cheer, for it is I, be not afraid. And he went unto them into the ship, and the wind ceased, and they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered. So they were sore amazed in themselves and beyond measure, and wondered. For they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. as I mentioned earlier, this was right after they had witnessed that incredible miracle. And they were amazed at themselves. You know, the waves, the sea, the wind was more obedient to Jesus than the disciples were in this case, and than we are in this life. Interesting. And when they had passed over, they came into the land of Gennesaret and drew to the shore. So they went on the shore. So, let's move to chapter 8. Chapter 8 in the latter part of chapter 7, it talks about Jesus is doing these various miracles. Verse 33, 7:33, and he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers in his ears and spit and touched his tongue, and looking to the heaven he sighed and saith him, I can't pronounce that is be open. So he was straight away, his ears were open. These are some of the miracles that he was doing during this period of time. So he was doing a whole range of miracles. Now, why did Jesus do miracles? And I suggest at least a couple of reasons. One is to demonstrate to the people and to his disciples that he is the Messiah. The miracles are a way for him to help them understand and see and believe that. The other reason for doing it was to teach spiritual lessons and to teach his disciples, who were going to, as we know later on, be the foundation of establishing his church here on the earth, are the ones who established the church. So this is the basic reasons behind the miracles, and I'm sure there are probably others. But if we go to chapter 8, verse 1, in those days the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples unto him and saith unto them. So it sounds like the exact repeat of the previous story. The previous miracle, not story. Verse 2, I have compassion on the multitude because they have now been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away, this is Jesus speaking, fasting to their own houses, they will faint by the way. In other words, they won't make it. For divers of them came from far. That means many of them came from far away. So they would have a long trip back. And his disciples answered him, from whence can a man satisfy these men with bread here in the wilderness? So the disciples have now seen Jesus feed 5,000. They saw him calm the storm, and here he's with the multitude again, and he's saying we need to feed the people. And once again, they're questioning, from whence can a man satisfy these men with bread here in the wilderness? It's unexplainable how they could see that. Now, if you think back to what we see in the Old Testament with the Israelites, same thing. All the 10 plagues are the 10 things God did to eventually get the Egyptians to release the Israeli people. And what do? Moses goes up on a mountain to get the 10 commandments, and in no time at all, they're worshiping idols and behaving badly after seeing all of those miracles in the parting of the Red Sea. Human flesh doesn't get it. It just doesn't get it. And I want you to think about it this way also. In our own lives, when we run into trouble or problems that are beyond our ability to address them, do we look back and see all the things that the good Lord has done for us leading up to that point in time, and therefore strengthen our faith and use the faith that he gave us and do what we can do and leave the rest to him in confidence that He's going to take care of us in whatever the best way is. I think what it is we're afraid He's not going to take care of us the way we want to be taken care of, right? Instead, He knows the best path. And I will tell you that in my personal life, I've experienced this myself where I multiple times, and this was many years ago, I thought I always knew, this was even after I'd come back into the church and had tried to be a faithful in attending and those kinds of things, and something would happen beyond my control, and I would think to myself, I know what God's going to do. I know what He's going to do. And every single time I ever thought that, I was exactly 100% wrong. Because what He did was something different, and what He did was something better than what I had in mind. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. We're not looking back, we're not remembering what He has done for us previously. And He asked them, how many loaves have ye? So it's the same repeat. And they said 7. And He commanded the people to sit down. I'm on chapter 8, verse 6. And He commanded the people to sit down on the ground. And He took the 7 loaves and gave thanks. And so He prayed again, blessed the bread, and brake and gave to His disciples. Pray unceasingly, pray all the time. And gave to His disciples to set before them, and they did set them before the people. So He told the people to do that which they could do, and He did the rest. And they had a few small fishes, and He blessed and commanded to set them also before them. So they did eat and were filled, and they took up the broken meat that was left, 7 baskets. This time there were 7 baskets left. Started with 7, ended up with 7. And they that had eaten were about 4,000, and He sent them away. Now, there are many denominations out there, or many people who have studied this part of the Bible and have tried to relate what does the number 12 baskets have to do with anything? What does 7 here have to do anything? Trying to make the 5,000, the 4,000. What kind of ideas can you come up with? 12 disciples, 12 baskets? It's not in the Bible, it doesn't tell us that, but these are theories. 12 tribes of Israel, 12 baskets. What does the number 7 mean? I don't think it matters because we're not told. I think what it's telling us is that Jesus did this twice. Why twice? That was the question I kept wondering about until early on Saturday morning. It occurred to me because Jesus knew what His disciples needed to experience. That was one reason. The other reason is the people were hungry and they were out in the wilderness listening to Him. So Jesus knew what the disciples didn't know that they needed, and He knew it beforehand. God knows us better than we know ourselves. And they that had eaten were about 4,000. And straightway He entered into a ship with His disciples and came them to the parts of Dalmutha. And so He got back in a ship after this was over, after they were fed. So again, He took care of them. Now I think if we move on, and the Pharisees came forth, verse 11, and began to question with Him, seeking of Him a sign from heaven, tempting Him. And He sighed deeply in His spirit and saith, so you can imagine, He's been doing all these things, all right, and the Pharisees and Sadducees were aware of it. He's been doing these miracles, and they show up and they say, question with Him, seeking of Him a sign from heaven that He is who He says He is. And He sighed, like these people don't get it. They never get it. Oh, of course, He knows why they don't. Why doth this generation seek? So He asked a rhetorical question. Why does this generation seek after a sign? Verily I say unto you, there shall no sign be given unto this generation. And he left them, and entering in the ship again, departed to the other side. If you have faith and you believe, you don't need a sign. If you don't have the faith that God gave you and you don't believe, that's when you ask for signs. We don't need a sign. My goodness, look what we have. We've got this book. We know so much more than the disciples did at that moment in time because we've got this New Testament that tells us all these things. You don't need a sign if you believe. And what does Jesus do all the time? He tells us to believe. And he left them and he entered into the ship again, verse 13, and went to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf. So they forgot to take the bread of these 7 loaves that they had left over. And he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Now you go over to Matthew and it says the Sadducees there. Beware of the leaven. I think I need some Kleenex. I apologize. Is there any close by? Excuse me. This isn't... Please forgive me for that interruption. So take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. These are the disciples. After Jesus made that statement, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. And when Jesus knew it, he saith unto them, why reason ye, because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not yet, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? Having eyes, see ye not? And having ears, hear ye not? And do ye not remember? Do you not remember when I brake the 5 loaves among the 5,000? How many baskets full of fragments took ye up? They say unto him, 12. And when the 7 among the 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said, 7. And he said unto them, how is it that ye do not understand? You have watched these miracles over and over and over again. And yet, you are taking the message that I stated about leaven, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, as if it was something to do with the physical bread. It's a symbolic statement. Bread is emblematic of the Scriptures. Leaven is the doctrine. He's telling them, beware of the doctrine of the Pharisees, and in this case, of Herod. Let's go over to Matthew. And chapter 15 tells the same story, but it adds a little bit additional commentary here. Reading that same section, starting in chapter 16, verse 6. Then Jesus said unto them, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, is it because we have taken no bread that Jesus said that? Because we didn't bring the bread? Which when Jesus perceived, he said unto them, O ye of little faith, why reason ye among yourselves, because you have brought no bread? Do ye not yet understand, neither remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? neither the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many baskets ye took up? How is it that ye do not understand that I spake it not to you concerning bread, that ye should be aware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Then understood they how that he bade them not beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Don't get caught up in their unbelief. Don't get caught up in what their works-based solution. Don't get caught up in that, was the message. And so why did Jesus do this twice? Because the disciples needed this lesson multiple times, just like we need that lesson multiple times. And then it's recorded here for us so we can look at it and gain great comfort from these miracles, and that we know that Jesus is always there. Go back to the statement in Mark 8, verse 18. Having eyes, see ye not, and having ears, hear ye not, and do ye not remember? Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is always watching us. He's always there. It reminds me of the story I've already told you about the movie about a football player that was working out at 4 o'clock in the morning, and his coach says, "Why are you here? You know, there's nobody here to see you do that." And he said, "Yes, there's always someone watching." All right, that's a secular, that's somebody who had a lot of faith, or had faith and was exercising his faith. We should say that. You don't need to worry. How many times does God tell us to fear not? Fear not. He's with us. And that we should take great comfort from in whatever situation that we're in. And be satisfied with what God's solution is to the problem, and pray for Him to solve it for you, and recognize it when it happens. Because often we don't even recognize it when it does happen.